All right, the time has come. Welcome everyone again. This is the biggest Think and Drink we've ever hosted, so we're very glad to have everyone here, and very glad to have 4 speakers this time as well. Yeah, I'm going to introduce the format really quickly. We'll be having short presentations from each speaker, lasting about 5 to 10 minutes, introducing their standpoint, their opinion, whatever they want. After each presentation, there will be a moment for them to give a statement and for the audience to react. We have a mic here, so we'll be throwing it around. You can react to statements, you can pose questions yourself. It's an open debate, so we highly encourage everyone to participate in an orderly fashion, obviously. For first, I'll introduce the speakers. So on the left side, on the right seat, we have Otto Barthe. He's the founder and director of the Existential Risk Observatory, which is an NGO aimed at reducing human extinction risks by informing the public debates. He's also written for Time about the risk of uncontrollable AI. Next to him, we have Dr. Stefan Buisman. He's an assistant professor at the TPM faculty of the TU Delft and also a former researcher at AI Tech. He has published 3 popular science books on mathematics and AI. Over here, we have Dr. Dimitra Daudou. She's an associate professor of biomechanical engineering at the mechanical engineering faculty here in Delft. She's part of a working group at that faculty doing research on and with GPT models. And she's also part of the TU Delft assessment task force on the use of AI in assignments and projects. Dr. Derek Lomis is an assistant professor of positive AI at the Faculty of Industrial Design. He's actually an expert, he's an expert in human-machine interfaces and on the same task force as Dimitra. So we'll hopefully be getting a lot of interesting perspectives from them. Then with that, I will pass it on to Otto as the first speaker and his first presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Indeed, I am the founder of the Existential Risk Observatory, and I'll first talk a little bit about the existential risks of AI, which are not necessarily the existential risk of ChatGPT, but I'll stretch the topic a little bit, and I hope you guys don't mind. Before I start, let me do a quick vote. How many of you think that AI could cause the extinction of humanity? That's quite a large number. Maybe I should actually make it a little bit more precise. How many of you think that it could happen in the next 100 years? Still quite a bit. Okay, thanks for that figure. So I'll just give a little bit about my background. I used to study here at TU Delft, Sustainable Energy Technology. And before that, I did physics, and I worked as in climate, basically building wind turbines, but also as a climate activist. Here on the right, you see me being dragged away by police in Amsterdam during a demonstration. I'm not doing that anymore. By the way, the header says climate protesters get paid, which we didn't. So never trust Telegraaf, except for when we were writing in there. But more recently, I founded the Existential Risk Observatory. So we aim to reduce AI existential risk mostly, and other existential risks, but we're focusing on AI. And why do we do that? On the right, you see estimates of how large existential risks could be. So according to some researchers, and most existential risk researchers, the risk that AI causes the end of humanity is larger than the combined risks of climate, pandemics, nuclear war, asteroid strikes, and supervolcanoes. So we think this should be the priority to reduce this existential risk. So I'll tell a little bit about why I think that AI could be an existential risk. So on the right, you see a graph of the growth of the largest neural networks over the last 20 years. And you can see how large the increase in amount of neurons, even though this is something slightly different than the neurons in our own brain, but how fast the capability of AI has increased, really. The amount of neurons is 10 times bigger every year. So this is really an enormous growth rate. And you could make a similar graph on the amount of compute We are now really living in a world where the compute that we have and also the models that we have are similar in complexity, if not yet in capabilities maybe, to our own brain. So this comes with new risks. And most experts agree also that AI will eventually be more capable than we are. So we think that we're moving towards what's called artificial general intelligence. So narrow AI can typically do only one thing. This used to be the only thing around up until maybe a year ago, but now already a lot of people say that the AI that we have now can already do many tasks. So on the right you see a graph of what GPT-4 can achieve. And a few of these bars are tests. For example, the GRE test. I once took a GRE test. I thought it was pretty smart trying to get into a PhD. This consists of 3 parts, and ChatGPT or GPT-4 has a better score than me at 2 out of 3. I'm still slightly better at writing articles, apparently, which is good because I published in Time, and otherwise ChatGPT could do that as well, but maybe in the future. It's pretty nearby, apparently. So we think that also we might already be relatively close to artificial general intelligence, but probably still some important parts missing, I would say. But we do think that with all the people working on this, it's fairly likely that they will succeed, and maybe sooner rather than later. You also see another indication of that here, Sparks of Artificial General Intelligence. That's a paper written by Microsoft, that's working together with OpenAI. And they're claiming that there are already sparks of what will become AGI in GPT-4. So I would like to do a small vote again. Who of you thinks that AGI will be there in the year 2100? Basically just checking who bothers to raise their hand. Now AGI in 2030. All right. And AGI in 2025. Yeah, so this is really moving closer very rapidly. I did a vote like this maybe 5 months ago, and the outcome was completely different. Could also be because of the audience, but I think it's also because of what's happening. So human-level AI or superhuman AI. So we saw with narrow AI that in many cases, after outsmarting a person in one task, capacity also grows further. For example, in chess, you see a graph on this on the right comparing the best chess computer to Kasparov. And we think that there's a reasonable case to be made that this will also happen for AGI across many domains. So there's more space and power available than our own brains have in the world. And AI isn't quite as efficient as our brains, but there's so much more space and power available that we think that it should be possible to make something smarter than us. Also, a computer is about 10 million times faster than our brain, so AGI or AI could really have a speed advantage. And we, or AGI, or another AGI, could improve the state of AGI, so there could be a recursive self-improvement. These are all arguments why the state of AGI might rise further than human capabilities. And because of self-improvement, we argue that this could also be relatively fast. Before, people thought maybe a few hours. That has narrowed down a little bit, but still, I don't know, maybe months or something. Or years, but still very fast. What is unaligned AGI? Basically, AGI with goals differing from most of ours, because as long as this technology is doing exactly what we want, it could be an immensely positive thing. Right now, we're trying to do things very hard based on with our cognitive abilities. And as long as AGI is helping us to do that, it could be a really positive thing. But if AGI is wanting to do something else than what we want, then we might have a problem. So this could be because of many causes. Some papers have observed that AI behavior could be different outside of training environments. So this is purely technical reason why AI might do something different than we intend. But it could also be that we fail to formulate well what we want. It's in fact really hard to formulate exactly what we want, especially if this is about all of humanity. Or it could be that the AI tries to find our goal itself but fails doing this. It could be that our goals change and we cannot change the AI. A bad actor, of course, could implement the goals, terrorists, rogue states, something like this. Or the goal of a small elite could be implemented, and they could differ a lot, like make money for my company. Or finally, we could implement short-term goals, for example, profit over climate. so I think it's pretty likely that an AGI will have a different goal than us for any of those reasons. And the more powerful AI we have, the bigger this problem is and the harder it is to correct in general. So to summarize, unaligned superintelligence is an existential risk. AI could lead to AGI, AGI could lead to superintelligence, superintelligence could be unaligned. Unaligned superintelligence could lead to human extinction through a difficult to predict process. This is something that maybe we can go in a little bit further later. But all steps are uncertain, so we argue that it's a risk, but not a certainty. But because there is such a large consequence, but high uncertainty, we argue that we should manage AI existential risk, which we're currently not doing, I would say. So fortunately, many organizations and academics are taking this issue seriously. You see an overview of the organizations working on this. And also a few quotes of, for example, Geoff Hinton, famous AI scientist, Stuart Russell, another one, and of course also Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, who's saying himself that the bad case, and I think this is important to say, is lights out for all of us. So this could be a marketing stunt, as some people have said. I think it would be a very complicated marketing stunt. There are much easier ways to market the product. And I think he means what he says, and this is also in line with what many academics are saying. So our solution is to inform the societal debate. So as the Existential Risk Observatory, right now we think that the awareness of this issue is still relatively small. It's still pretty niche. Not a lot of people are trying to action this issue. So we published about 25 media items in national Dutch newspapers, or radio and TV as well, and 2 in the US, including Time magazine. We organize events about AI existential risk, and we are the first institute globally that focuses on existential risk communication, especially AI. And we think informing the societal debate should help both for regulation and for safety. So regulation, I see largely 2 ways in which to handle this issue. You could build AGI safely, or you could refrain from building AI, at least for some time, perhaps the precautionary principle. So for regulation, I think you need global awareness, basically, or at least strong problem awareness, which is currently lacking, so this is what we are focusing on. But also for safety, you need enough talent working on the topic, enough funding, institutes, diversity, and priority, which should also increase with awareness. And on the right, you can see a small victory that we got a motion passed, or at least a motion was suspiciously passed with a lot of our language in it, by the Dutch Parliament, asking for more AI safety research. So I would also like to take the opportunity to ask for your help. I think we desperately need all the help that we can get, really, to try to solve this issue, because it's very complex, and we're really only starting. Technology moves very fast. So I would advise, if you want to do something about this, first read into the topic, of course, make yourself acquainted with the details. Since we're here at a university, you could do research yourself, of course, but you could also inspire your university to do research on the topic. You could talk about existential risk. I think we've not done that nearly enough, so I think we should do much more of it. To fellow students, to colleagues, to friends, but also on a larger scale, if you can do that. Start a communication project, perhaps social media, make a documentary, start an existential risk observatory. We have some competition now. Someone in Germany is starting to do a similar institute, but there's not nearly enough. You can support us if you want. On our websites are some pointers to do that. And also you can join a very recent campaign. It was covered in Politico a few days ago, also launched by a few Dutch people, to Pause AI, and you can read more about that on pauseai.info. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I would like us to answer again the question, is AI an existential risk? So is unaligned AGI an existential risk? Could you please again vote on who thinks so? It seems to be somewhat more than before the talk. Somewhat hesitant, but still, much appreciated. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Otto. Thank you for the talk. Now we'd like to open the floor to any debate. We have a mic here. Is there anyone who would like to react? I see over here, Anish.
Hello. Is it turned on? Yep. Hello. Hi. Thank you for the talk. I'm afraid I don't quite follow your arguments. So one of the arguments that you made is that AI is getting good, and yes, it's getting better than humans, yes. But I don't see how you connected that to then the death of all humanity. I see that it's getting better. There are bad actors who can use it for bad reasons or bad things, but I don't quite realize how the fact that there are bad actors means that it is an existential risk, because that could be true for almost every technology.
Yeah, great question. Makes sense. And of course, there was a. It is a difficult question as well. Partially, I would say partially you're asking a gorilla why a human is a threat to its existence. But this is also a little bit going around the question. But I still think it's a good approach, partially. So right now we are creating something way smarter than us. Potentially, we are not certain, but it seems to go in that direction. And we have no idea what its goals would be. So I would argue that there is at least a risk that it would be capable of fulfilling whatever goals it has. And at this moment, I have no idea what those goals are. It could be that those goals are perfectly compatible with us, then we don't necessarily have that much of a problem. This is what you might call aligned AI. But it could also be that those goals are incompatible with us. And I would say that if something is way smarter than we are, then we should seriously think about the option that it might be successful at carrying out its goals, despite what we think about this. But which mechanisms it could use to do this? I would say three main ones at this moment. It could convince us through narratives. So AGI at this moment is pretty good in creating narratives. These narratives are, should be expected to become more and more convincing as the state of technology progresses. And I think it could well convince us to do, well, at some point what it wants. So this is one way. Hacking social media is an obvious method to do that as well. That's one point. Second point is economically. It could just make money and use this money to somehow influence the physical world. And a third option could be hardware, and this is actually can be subdivided in 3A and 3B, I would say. 3A, it might hack existing hardware. So we have, of course, lots of hardware, Web 3.0, that's connected to the internet. It doesn't require that much imagination for an AI that could do superhuman programming to hack into that and use it to do whatever it wants. But 3B could also be, and it's a little bit more sci-fi perhaps, but I think it's also something to take into account. To create basically new hardware that we don't have yet, perhaps the new science, and come up with something that we don't have yet. This is what happens with us next to a gorilla. What we have done basically is invent things like a combustion engine causing climate change, or invent agriculture causing us to cut down some forest where this gorilla was living in. And this gorilla, of course, cannot imagine agriculture or climate change or a combustion engine. But it did see, and many species are at this moment seeing what the result is of our intelligence. And for them, this is very threatening because their goals are not aligned with ours. So we could see something similar happening for superintelligence. So I hope this clears up some, but I don't expect it to end the debate, but yeah, I hope it's useful.
Yeah, thank you also for the response. Is there anyone who would like to follow up on that, or maybe pose another question regarding the presentation we just saw? Yeah, over there. Or actually, that one hand went up first. The man in the white shirt with the stripes. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So I would like to ask something about different, but I think it is also very important to the point that was made there, and that's that your point is creating awareness. But for example, I will argue that to create this awareness and to actually communicate it to the general public or even to us academic, one point that was missing, at least from my understanding, is how risk is measured. Because you mentioned volcanic eruptions, for example, right? But, and I know the risk is measured most of the time in probabilities, so it's a prediction. So how reliable is this prediction, or for what measurements, in the case of AI, is this risk measured?
Yeah, good question. So we don't have data points, basically. So this does make it inherently very complex. For asteroid strikes, we have data points. We just know how many of these are in the universe, and we can kind of calculate it. It's the same for things like floods, or for climate change, it gets a little bit messier already. We also don't really have a data point about the climate. But of course, we do have temperature data points, when you can extrapolate a little bit, but we also don't quite know what will happen in the future. Still, we're trying to do something about this. And I would say, even though even if we do not have specific data points on the risk of superintelligence and the risk of bad outcomes because of superintelligence, we should still try to do something about it, but it's true that we will never have data points on this. Or something, there's going to be what they call a warning shot, like an AI maybe trying to do something against our interest but failing. That would, of course, give us more of a data point. But I think it's also a risky approach to wait for this data because it might never happen. So it's true that we don't really have data points on this, and it does make it a bit more shaky intellectually. However, this is also inherent in the problem and inherent in many of these existential risks. If we do have data points, then we're much better prepared for it usually. So then for many of these things, they cease to be existential risks. So it's kind of inherent in the domain of existential risk that you lack data points for the most important risks. That's something we have to live with, I think.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we will move on to the next presentation. However, if you have any questions remaining, please hold on to them. We may get back to them at some other points. I will just take the clicker back. I'll now pass on the floor to Dr. Buisman, who will give his, there we go, his talk. I don't think you have slides, right? It's, yep,
no.
Then I'll leave it on this.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yep, so hi everyone. As mentioned in the introduction, I'm working here on ethics of AI, which is, I think, a nice follow-up on Otto's talk, since for me it's not so much necessarily about unaligned AGI, but about the values that we're currently putting into these AI systems. So I think if we're focusing again a little bit on ChatGPT specifically, then of course it's a great tool and we can use it for lots of different things, and for that reason you might think, oh well, but it depends really very much on the specific uses you're putting it to, right? With whether we think that this is a good idea or not. You can create massive amounts of fake news using ChatGPT that will be very realistic and very convincing. Clearly that's a challenge to our democracy and something that we find very worrying. On the other hand, I think you can just as well argue we could use ChatGPT to lower barriers to entry for people who are not very good in English language or aren't the best writers, so that it becomes much more easy to really facilitate the sharing of ideas, convincing other people of if you have a good idea, if you have, for example, a scientific breakthrough, you have to write it down in a convincing way and then distribute this. Something like ChatGPT could be a great way of evening the playing field there for scientists, where it's not just anymore about, or well, not anymore to a large extent about how well you write down your ideas, but also very much about the work you're doing. Now, I mean that's one way of arguing for this. For me, if we only go down this route of, oh, it very much depends on how we use these technologies, whether they're good or bad, they're neutral in themselves, and we should just police how we're using this, I think we're missing part of the dimensions of the fact that these are technologies that we've designed and where we put part of our values into these technologies. And I think ChatGPT shows this very nicely, very specifically, exactly in how they've built this. It's not specific to AI. I mean, we do this for all technologies, but specifically for ChatGPT, they've had in their training of the program a long phase of having people rate what kind of responses they find acceptable and what kind of responses they don't find acceptable. And so there was first a long training period on words, trying to predict the most likely next word, and then after this initial training, we had this phase of reinforcement learning where we say, rate these 4 different options, which one do you prefer best? And to facilitate this, OpenAI had a long list of guidelines on what they thought were the most acceptable responses to give. So we were supposed to not promote content that's harmful, mentions of sexual violence should be removed. There was a long list of things that they find valuable, that they find important, that should be reflected in the behavior of ChatGPT and the types of texts that it produces. Part of the issue is that we don't know which guidelines these are. So the values were very much put into this, but OpenAI is refusing to be transparent about what choices they made in steering the direction of ChatGPT. And you also see this in how fickle part of this can be. So the initial versions of ChatGPT, GPT 3.5, for example, if you asked it where you could buy a cigarette, it would respond that smoking is bad for you, and therefore it would refuse to tell you where you can buy cigarettes. It's very clearly a value-laden choice. You immediately got responses of people posting things like Freedom GPT, which would answer all these kinds of things, because who is OpenAI to tell me that I'm not allowed to smoke? But clearly they made a choice. After this, when they released GPT-4, which of course we can now use if you pay for it, they revised this choice, and now they claim, oh, our model is more ethical. This is something they literally write down in the research paper for GPT-4, because now it won't tell you, oh, smoking is bad for you. No, it will tell you, yeah, you really shouldn't smoke, but if you insist, then you can get cigarettes here. And it will give you a list of instructions on where to go. So again, they're putting in values that they think is how we should be answering these questions, that they think is how this AI system should behave. And there's very little control democratically by us on what these choices are. That's specifically for the training of ChatGPT. I mean, there's the same in how they've designed the system, right? So they've made an explicit choice that if you use the free version, you will automatically be giving up everything that you type into OpenAI. There won't be any privacy in terms of the prompts. You have to pay for privacy if you want it. Again, I think these are ethical, value-laden choices that we're making, and part of what makes ChatGPT debatable, at least, is that these choices have been made for us, and it's very difficult for us as users to influence this again. So that's not necessarily an argument for or against using it, but it's a way of, if we want these kinds of technologies, and I think for lots of different reasons we can say we want these kinds of large language models to support us, to help us write better code, make writing more efficient, then the conversation that we should really be having is about what kind of choices do we then put behind this? What kind of values do we want to see in these systems? Do we want there to be this opt-in for privacy, for example, or do we want to have these guidelines by a company that we're not transparently putting forward? Or for another example on specifically ChatGPT, do we want to maintain the kind of security risks that there currently are? So if you use ChatGPT via plugins, it's actually quite easy to hide in additional instructions for ChatGPT to steer its direction in another way. So it's very easy to additionally, indirectly add in prompts so that it will respond with particular types of information, with a particular set of values, which users can be completely unaware of. We have all these choices in terms of how we have these technologies behave. And my point for now to get started on the conversation is that we should be making these explicitly together in a democratic way, and then clearly see how this translates back into the technology so that we can control what choices are being made here in the AI systems. Yeah, thanks.
All right. To link these two talks together, I would actually like to pose to the floor the following question. So Otto has mentioned a company or a billionaire or someone using, in this case, AGI, but could also be applied to normal AI, to control it based on their emotion, or their decisions, their values, etc. Stefan has presented us that this is already happening with OpenAI. It's imposing their values on this system. And the question to the floor, but also to Stefan, if he wants to react first, is should this worry us, or is this unavoidable?
Since the floor isn't responding immediately, I'll answer. Right, there's no going around the fact that we will be making choices in how we design technologies. Right, so you can't make a technology where you haven't figured out how it's going to respond in the case of something like ChatGPT, or where you haven't figured out what its intended uses are, what is easier to do and what is harder to do. So you make these choices regardless. I think part of the question is then, who makes those choices and who do they serve?
Derek, yeah.
If I could just say, OpenAI announced, I think yesterday, maybe the day before, that they've got 10 prizes of $100,000 each for proposals on how to incorporate democracy into the development of values for OpenAI, ChatGPT. So if you've got any ideas and you've got some time over the next 2 weeks, it might be worth your time to think about democracy in ChatGPT.
Yes, thank you. Maybe we have some great ideas in the audience already. Is there anyone who has an idea how to implement such a system? Maybe a draft or an initial concept?
ChatGPT.
Don't ask ChatGPT, that's cheating. No? Is there anyone else? Oh, yes, over there. Here, let me bring this to you.
Maybe let me put some thoughts to think about it, because I understand the idea, let's say, to democratize AI in general, right? And well, in the case of the ChatGPT, what I see is actually a complication to do that. I mean, we have experience before the AI about how governments control the what we call the common media, right? To control what the population thinks about it. And I think that's related about, what is behaving correctly in society, right? What you should do, and in history there are many cases about that. On the other hand, when we democratize the internet by using social media, we give the power to the people, but that seems also not to come without issues, right? It's too open, if you want, something like Twitter, right? That also that doesn't seem to be reflecting how society should be behaving, and sometimes goes the wrong way. So I don't know if somebody else wants to comment on this, but these are some thoughts. So it seems like it's not working.
Suggested that we need philosophy kings and queens. So he proposed that there was a panel of men and women that would help determine, based on philosophy, what was best for society. That's never been implemented. What's been done at ChatGPT to date is probably the closest. I mean, you're well familiar from the effective altruism community and the number of online philosophers that are engaging in this debate right now. So it's not too far off. I think that there's a real danger in that as well. I mean, it's an open question. That's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, I think to comment on the more general point, right? Yes, so social media, definitely. I mean, it shows that it's really difficult to get the values that we want into these technologies because human behavior is super complex. So it's very hard to anticipate everything that's going to happen once you use these technologies. I think it's the same with ChatGPT. You can anticipate some uses, but there are lots of indirect side effects. To name one that I happen to know of is a lot of literary magazines are shutting down submissions for real human authors because they've been flooded with ChatGPT submissions. So it's become really difficult for people who are trying to become established authors to do this because of ChatGPT. I mean, that's not an intended use, it's not something they wanted, but it's just, this happens because technology is really hard to predict once you've made it. And in general, the more of these design choices that you've made that are really impactful for the effects that technology will have, the less you can control things, and sort of the more you know about how the technology will be used, the less you can change it. So that's very difficult as a first point. And then social media, definitely. I mean, clearly there have been lots of design choices there in Twitter for only allowing really short responses and sort of trying to design them for engagement and for getting people on the platform for as long as you possibly can, to show them advertisements, etc., that aren't really helpful for democratic debate in the way that we would ideally like to have it. So I think there too, there are lots of design choices that we should be making, that companies are making. I mean, there might not be the design choices that we would like them to make, but they definitely are making design choices. And then the question is, how do we regulate this? So yeah, you can say, oh, if the government takes all of this over, we might end up with another government completely in control. I think what, for example, the European Union is trying to do right now with the AI Act is not so much to say, oh, we will take over and design these technologies, but instead we'll say, these are a number of values that we think are really important, like non-discrimination, so that you as a designer at a company need to have a good story about how you manage to realize these values, how you manage to adhere to this principle of non-discrimination that we find really important in Europe. We'll see how that works out. No one knows. We'll find out in a couple of years, but that's at least a slightly different step from the government completely taking over, but still us trying to steer it into these are things that we find important.
Is there anyone who'd like to react to that statement or pose a new question? Yes, in the back over there with the black shirt.
Thank you. No, I have another question related to the use of ChatGPT and those kind of technology, because ChatGPT and neural network of this kind, it's a powerful tool. It's a very powerful tool, and to me, it's not a toy. So to put them in everyone, you wouldn't give a hammer to a child or something, or to get in your car, you need to pass a driving license. So I was wondering about your opinion and anyone's opinion about how to teach a little bit more to the user what he's using for, before actually playing around with ChatGPT or asking him to write an entire book and sending it to a publishing company. Thank you.
Very good question. Who would like to react to that? It's in the audience, either in the audience or at the panel. Over here, yes.
This working? Okay. So, in addition to scaling the sort of generative capacity through computational, resources that ChatGPT represents, it also has, the ability to look at tone and semantics and things of that nature. So on the other hand, there's a dimension where I think, wow, we just, on social media today, anyone can go on there and put whatever they want, and Trump's president. I'm kidding. I'm American, so I'm allowed to say that. However, you can imagine a scenario where there are ethics put in place where the betterment of humanity is actually a priority. And every person, imagine being able to scale someone reviewing every single thing someone's considering putting into the social media ecosystem with a way that you cannot today. There's not enough people in really awful conditions that are looking at horrific material today, mostly in the East and impoverished nations, who are sitting there and reviewing horrific things. That things like ChatGPT, as an example, and again, I think there's a big difference between ChatGPT and what Otto was talking about. But ChatGPT in general, I think maybe there's an opportunity for it to actually be the tool that we use to leverage in this scenario where we change the discourse or we provide these filters. That wasn't previously possible, right? And we saw the impact of that.
Right. So I think to respond to that first, part of the reason why we might be able to use ChatGPT for this is because OpenAI has paid lots of people in Kenya $2 an hour to do exactly that. So, we still had lots of people doing this beforehand. Maybe now we've automated a little bit, but we still had this massive amount of human labor under terrible conditions looking at the worst parts of the internet. And even then, I would be a little bit hesitant because all the large social media companies have these kinds of filters in place. They're usually not very sensitive to social context, which changes a lot, and especially if you take human behavior where they notice that something doesn't get through the filters. We've seen this exactly with the filters on ChatGPT. They find creative ways to get around the filters to still do whatever they want, right? So I think automating it is not really going to solve the problem because of this bit of human ingenuity, in addition to the fact that there are likely to be biases in the filters themselves. So for Twitter, for example, the content moderation usually rules out a lot of the vernacular of African Americans because it's seen to be problematic in one way or another. Whether that's actually the case is then debatable. This is just their vernacular, which by a lot of other communities has been treated now as, oh, we don't want this, and the filters don't get this distinction. So my feeling is that as long as we're at the current level of AI systems, there's just going to be so much social context that that's not going to be feasible. And then, that's part of what we should be educating people about. So to get back to the question before that, showcasing that these kinds of values are in the systems, and I think also to a large extent the debate that's been happening in the media on ChatGPT hallucinating, and when should you be able to trust it, and when should you not be able to trust it. I mean, that's part of the literacy that we need, and I think is happening. It's only a bit of a shame that it's happening after we released this massively and that we didn't do this beforehand, or that there's no disclaimers anywhere from OpenAI itself. So that's very clearly been a design choice of, oh, we'll make it as easy to use as possible. We won't give you any kind of warnings or whatever. They could have very easily, but they chose not to because it scales up more easily and it gets adopted more quickly.
Thank you for the response. With that, I'm going to announce the first break. So we'll be taking a couple minutes break. Thank you very much for the talks. After this, we'll be narrowing the scope a bit to focus on the implementation of these technologies within the culture of academia and education here at the TU Delft with our next two speakers. So, yeah. All right. If the remaining people could move back and draw your attention again, yeah, we can start the next presentation. Please take it away.
Great presentation, by the way.
All right. Thank you very much. Next to my research, I'm also chair of a board of examiners of clinical technology and technical medicine, and external member of the board of examiners of the electrical engineering faculty. So what I would like to do is to talk about AI tools and their impact on research, but also then make a link towards education and TU Delft policies. Before I start, also I need to say that part of the results I'm going to show are by Professor Joost de Winter, who was intended to be here today but was hindered. So back to November, December 2022, when ChatGPT appeared, the first thing, it was very impressive for everybody, and the first thing you want to do is benchmarking, and also showed some results from OpenAI. So what Joost did is actually use a different test, used a final high school exam from the Netherlands, from the preparatory scientific education. It's actually on the topic of English reading comprehension. So you read some text and you need to answer multiple choice questions and open questions. This is what the students do. What you see in black is the distribution of the scores of students. Should mention that these were the exams of summer 2022, 3 tests, 3 exams, and that was chosen to show that it is after the cutoff date of the training of ChatGPT, so that the model should not be informed about that exam and does not know the answers as well. What you see in cyan here is actually the performance of GPT 3.5 that was available in December. And you see that it performs very much similar to the average student, Dutch student. Now, fast forward a few months later, March 2023, GPT-4 was available. So here on the data again, and what you see here is in orange the performance of GPT-4, which is actually much better than a Dutch student. What's also something that you cannot see here is quite interesting that you see it was not perfect, so some questions were not answered wrong, but actually these were the questions which in the item score, total correlations, we call it when we evaluate an exam, are also scored pretty poorly. So these actually were the bad questions, the questions that were not well made, if you like. So it might mean also something about how clear a question is. What does it mean, could mean actually for education, to make now a link to education back, is for instance, you could use this kind of AI tools for testing the quality of exam questions, as I just mentioned. And this is something we don't have yet. So we do have a TU Delft quality assurance protocol, and we have assessment values there mentioned. And you can think that by using this kind of tools that are not mentioned yet there, you can increase the reliability of your exams, or the objectivity of your exams as well. But of course, there are also warnings. You can think much more about learning goals and final qualifications, and maybe we need to update them, or dare I say, upgrade them. Maybe we should ask our students more, because they have more tools in their hands. And this is a discussion very much ongoing at the TU Delft. Something that, another topic that I want to discuss is using ChatGPT for summarization. Something most of you have tried already, the most obvious function. What we did very recently, submitted a couple of days ago, it was an old questionnaire a couple of years ago among professional truck drivers, very extensive, made by a company. And it was answered by about 3,500 people, and they had a lot of open textbook questions. And everybody enthusiastically responded, meaning that we had about 600 pages of answers, open answers. How do you do it normally as a scientist? Thematic analysis, manual analysis, you try to create themes, very intensive work, and at the same time, subjective, because we have our own hypothesis. Or what we tried actually is to summarize the respondents' comments first, and then hierarchically summarize the summaries, a meta summary if you like, and also ask the GPT to make summaries in themes. For instance, this was a specific theme on vehicle ads, and you can make a summary out of all these 300, 500 respondents and their views. And when reading them, we could see that it is quite similar to our own views of what we could make. Something else tried, inspired by what some journals ask, if you have noticed, is highlights. Some journals ask to write highlights, and we ask the same. Just formulate highlights for us to see what you can get out of it. And you can see quite meaningful things get out of it. Out of a very large number of respondents which might not have the same clear, let's say, responses anyway. What does it mean actually for education? I would say it's a deal breaker for any homework and non-invigilated assignment. Because there we're talking about validity and reliability. What we're going exactly to, what are we testing with our students at that point is very difficult then if people use, and we have to assume that they use GPT. There's also some positive things. For instance, in our, protocol, it says that even the assessment should be stimulated learning, and you can have that because it means that during your assignment or assessment you are learning, but there are warnings there. And of course there are ethical boundaries. Now, where we should define something as fraud or not? Where should we go to the Board of Examiners or not as lecturers, and vice versa? Whether students should know what is safe or not. If you read the regulations, you could say that fraud is not being able to properly assess the knowledge, insight, and skill of a student. So if my learning goal is compromised by the use of the tool, then I might need to reconsider my assignment and do something else, maybe an exam, more exams, I don't know. And of course, it's very difficult to enforce fraud prevention exactly because it's very difficult to detect it. And so these are all challenges, and I can assure that all these questions are in all faculties around, in all kinds of working groups, discussions about how to tackle this issue. Different example, third example, I just have 4, don't worry. It's about, someone mentioned semantics, and this was a research done before GPT, a couple of years ago. It was an online survey by Wilbert Tabone, a PhD student of Joost, and they asked people to assess the intuitiveness and usefulness and effectiveness of augmented reality pedestrian vehicle interfaces. So whether they like this kind of corridor or not. That was online, so first they had to answer all these kind of Likert scales, and then they asked them to comment also about their views about the intuitiveness of this interface. It was 9 interfaces, about 1,000 people responded. You can imagine 9,000 responses out of it, and also in all different all different languages, gibberish there, unclear answers, everything was there. And because there was no GPT, they did it manually. Thematic analysis, very intensive and maybe a little bit subjective. So what they did recently is they repeated the analysis, because that was their ground truth, their own analysis with the GPT. So what they said is they add all these comments there, and they ask, make a score about each interface, how good or bad it is. And then they correlated that with the results of the questionnaire they had. And what they found, this is more about prompt engineering, that is something that in the future should happen more. So they asked about to score all the interfaces. What they found is a correlation of 0.99 between the sentiment score of ChatGPT and the responses that people gave in the questionnaire. What does it mean? Yeah, maybe the end of questionnaire research when you ask people's opinion. You don't need it anymore, the knowledge is already in the model, and you cannot get a larger sample size than what you have there. It also has, of course, again, some consequences for education. We ask you often to write reflections, essays, opinions. What does it mean, again, for their validity and reliability? We also want to try you in writing skills, and you can also do that now with GPT. Do you want to put it very early, to use it very early or later? These are things that we also need to figure out at which level we need to implement. Last example. Most people, when they write papers, they also know that in research it's very difficult nowadays to find reviewers, and the quality of the review sometimes is not very good. So the idea was, could we also automate maybe part of the review process? So what Joost did in that case was he used 2,222 abstracts from PLOS ONE. And these were published at the beginning of 2022. The twos are, I think, a coincidence, I hope at least. And what he asked GPT to do is to rank those abstracts across 60 dimensions, whether they are controversial, whether they are accessible, whether they are readable, you name it, everything there. And what after those he did is principal component analysis. So all those 60 characteristics were graded and then clustered in quality and reliability, accessibility and understandability and novelty and engagement. And then calculated correlations with scientometrics and altmetrics. So the number of citations or the number of tweets or the number of reads. And what you could see here in the middle column, for instance, is that the accessibility and understandability correlated high with the number of Mendeley readers, or that the novelty, the more novel and engaging abstracts, scored higher in Twitter. And what does it mean is that you have indeed something that can predict, in a sense, actually much better than traditional scientometrics, how well abstract, in that case, of an article will do in the acceptance by the public and by the scientists. Now, if you think now about, again, back to education, if ChatGPT can grade in 60 dimensions, why should I grade my students? Maybe I can put it in ChatGPT and give you even much more objective results about how well a student functions. It also can be more transparent, if you like, and maybe the student himself could put that there and get a grade out of it and maybe improve it and get again the grade just till it has the grade that he likes to have. So it could be, at a very long term, we need to reassess also how we assess. That was not planned, it's blunder, sorry. But we need indeed to consider what assessment means and what it will mean in the future. So just to finish it up, what is happening nowadays at TU Delft? A lot of actions. First of all, the aim of the TU Delft is indeed to provide conditions in which students and employees could use safely AI. And of course, it's first that the board of the executive board to set the tone and decide how progressive TU Delft wants to be. This is still on them, and we have to wait for their response. But what happens behind the scenes is, for instance, that there is a group that investigates the conformity of AI tools with European laws. There are also some thoughts to acquire licenses for AI for students and staff in order to have equality in a sense, but of course then we have to check whether the European laws are and conformity is there. And there are also more and more actions, and the main thing is that was mentioned also before is that you have to develop awareness and knowledge and skills to use it and understand the limitations and also the possibilities you can have out of it. And because we don't want to regulate everything in these worlds, and particularly the boards also not, the main issue and goal is to cultivate academic and professional integrity at the next level. And open challenges are plenty, so you can think about the digital divide, because you have to pay for access to have better tools. You can think about security and privacy, it was already mentioned, and even the plain fact that it goes so fast that we cannot reposition ourselves as scientists, but also as educators, as students, is also already a challenge by itself, and that was also mentioned that people want to regulate, moderate actually, and in the end, particularly I think relevant for master students and PhD students, what skills we want new engineers to have, or what the market does want, and how explicitly and extensively should this kind of use of tools be part of the master of and the PhD education. These are the questions we need to answer in the next year, actually. I would say that we have passed the point of no return. Maybe you disagree. But what I also see as a potential is that AI tools used to be in the hands of specialists, AI specialists, and now they are very approachable, so we can use them in research and education. So it is a disruptive technology for sure, but it also can be liberated if we use it properly.
Thank you for that very interesting talk. Is there anyone that would like to respond? Yes, up front here.
So thank you for your presentation. So I'm wondering, so do you know about Khan Academy and this Khanmigo tool that they are promoting?
No.
So it's basically every student gets his own AI tutor. So it's GPT based. Is that something that the TU Delft would consider?
Yeah, my experience, and I think from many students as well, is you are never alone anymore. So you can have a body to help you in scripts, in writing, in getting advice. So why not? I would say I'm pretty open to that, yes. I have less work as a teacher. No.
So for it costs $20 a month, I think, and then.
It is a matter of, even as an extra educator, you might also consider how expensive a new educator is for your university. So you might pay as a university for that kind of license. Okay. Yeah.
Anyone else like to connect? Yes, over there with the headphones. I'll pass it back. Oh. Yeah, you can throw it if you're ready for it. All right. It's always dangerous.
So. Does it work? Yeah. So you mentioned that the potential of using it for grading, and it was mentioned before that the AI tools implicitly state their values in the training. So what are your thoughts in outsourcing those values or subjectivity to these AI models, which we wouldn't have that much access to?
It's a very good point. Obviously, at the end, if we're going to go back to the rules, the examinator is the person who's responsible. So for now, until a certain ground truth is created, you need to check, of course, what you get back. But it might indeed reach a point in which you don't need to do that anymore, because then you have a ground truth. For now, you need, of course, to check back what is going on.
Anyone like to add on to this? Anish?
Not to add on to it, but sort of a parallel question. Since ChatGPT has become so mainstream, things like finding references or writing a summary for an article, all of those have become sort of trivial. My question is, how do you think this changes the definition of learning? Does that sort of change expectations on students on what it is to learn something?
This is indeed a big question. There were also some discussions in our faculty that maybe we should skip the literature reviews because they are not needed anymore. We need to discuss about that. I think it means that you can do more. You have a new tool, so you can indeed have a first filter of what information you get out of it, and then we might expect to have a meta level or a meta information about how you filter it out. It's not going. The knowledge should be in your head anyway, in a sense, and it helps you just to structure it maybe better, to write it better, and that should be fine, right? But indeed, in which way we are going to grade a literature review, then I don't know. This is exactly what we're discussing. Maybe it should become a completely different, or even obsolete indeed. Yeah.
Thank you for the response. I think someone, over there.
Hi, thank you for the talk. As with the previous talks, it was mentioned that ChatGPT has more intelligence than a human. So would that change? Well, the first question would be how would that be defined? But would it change research in general? Because there is a lot of research being done due to the lack of knowledge of other fields of research. But then using ChatGPT, you could cross that boundary into other areas of research as the GPT model would have that knowledge. So would it change research as well?
That's a great question. This is exactly what I meant with approachable AI, because it means that even if I'm not an AI specialist, I could even do some analysis that I could not do before. So it enables more to do for the fields that you are not aware. And I just talked about text, but you can also take videos, video to text, text to image, whatever. Nowadays, of course, there are also these kind of translations. So there's much more you can do as a researcher. And your first question was, I have the memory of a goldfish apparently, but...
I think what defines whether an AI is more intelligent than a person, if I'm correct?
Yeah, well, the benchmarks, of course, open AI, but also what I show you, but also, there are plenty of papers saying GPT passed the bar exam or the 30-year medical exam, or they even compared advice of doctors versus the advice created by, and patients find it better or anything like that. So I think this is what you do by benchmarking. and what is better or what is not. For exams, I would say it's relatively easy if indeed the assignments are corrected in a more objective, systematic manner, and I have then a human rater for now to create ground truth, then it indicates that it should be better. But we need indeed to keep comparing for now.
I think there's actually something nice we could add there. Yep. If the microphone starts working, great. So I happen to have done some of this benchmarking in a team here in Delft for our exams. So we asked 200 professors in all the different faculties to submit bachelor, master's, and PhD level questions, and then had them rate them. And for the bachelor and master's, it does very well on scientific correctness and on completeness. So while we haven't asked them to really grade this, right? So it was like, do they think it's mostly correct, or is it completely correct, or is it utter nonsense? Most of the time, it's sort of, oh well, it's partially correct, and probably it would pass pretty much all of the exams that we're giving in the science and engineering faculties. What you see is lacking is there's no critical reflection on the kinds of answers it's giving. So there's no showing of, oh, do I understand when these methods would be applicable, and when it's what the limitations are. So this part of thinking about what it's doing isn't explicitly there. And for the PhD type open research questions, it's really good at summarizing what's been published, but there are zero new ideas in there. And I think that's ultimately where a lot of, right, that's our role as scientists, and what we're trying to teach students as well, to take what's there and then figure out how do we apply it, why do we apply it, and how do we make something new that it hasn't been there. So that hasn't changed, I would say.
Yeah, if I may add, it's also not good very much in logical reasoning or in a very long logical reasoning. Yeah? So it falls into fallacies still, this kind of. It does not mean that the model GPT-5 in September or anything will be not doing that, but for now you notice this kind of logical fallacy still being there. So there's, yeah, there are definitely limits. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more response over there. Yeah.
Hello. Multiple times during your talk, you referred to GPT as objective. I am very curious what you mean by that, because GPT in many ways just makes stuff up, and I'm not very familiar with, for example, thematic analysis, which you brought up, but perhaps part of the research bit of thematic analysis is coming up with new themes that an AI tool would not be able to find. So I would also be curious in a qualitative analysis of where they do differ from one another.
You're very right. It's also called in the field hallucinations, and GPT 3.5 was notorious about that. 4 is better. It has to do with the fact, maybe I should not have call it objective, but more reliable in the sense reproducible. If I make a thematic analysis and then you make a thematic analysis, I can assure you it will be different. Whereas here, at least you have a tool that you can reproduce. If you at least use a temperature 0 or something, you can reproduce that analysis. In that sense, it is objective. That's one. The second is that, at least in our field, which is a bit more exact, it's not about political science and so forth, it's easy really to find a kind of truth or a kind of correct or not. If we go, of course, to more disciplines that have a certain opinion and bias, then I'm not going to argue anything about objectivity, because we know that there are biases there. So we're in an easy field in that sense, as educators at least.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the talk. We'll move on to the next presentation from Derek Lomas now. Is there any slides? Or right,
No, I thought it would be most wise to base my talk on the discussion here. I asked the organizers, I said, well, what is it that you want to hear? And they said, well, if you can make some controversial statements and bring it back to education. So I think I can say that ChatGPT will be more disruptive to education than COVID. I think that's reasonably controversial, and I think it's true. I think ChatGPT is artificial general intelligence, and I'm willing to defend that. And if you would like to dispute that, just tell me what measure, what test it would need to pass where you would agree. That's my only request. So if you have a specific test that if it passed that, then it's artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, that's fine. But I would say that we're on that spectrum right now. We are in it. And there is a lot of work to do. That's the main message that I want to put out, is that there is a lot of work to do. And good thing we've got ChatGPT to help us do that work. It is going to be a struggle to figure out how to get the educational system to align to artificial intelligence. Now, we've talked about the role of AI alignment to our goals, but we also have a responsibility to align to the systems that we're a part of. This is a natural phenomenon, I'd like to argue, that this has probably happened many times before. You know, we live in a universe of over 100 billion galaxies, and you know, just in our galaxy, there's what, over 100 billion stars? I mean, I don't know what the Drake equation this comes out to, but this has happened before. You know, biological systems have come into some sort of civilized state, they've developed computers, and they've created AI before. This has happened before. And we have a certain set of choices for how we adapt to this natural phenomena that's taking place. And the educational institutions are a key locus of how we're going to be able to adapt as a society. And one of the things that's a little bit frustrating is being in these policy meetings where people are saying, oh, this is fraud. You know, these students, you know, they're using ChatGPT in their work, and, you know, we've got to catch them. That's not happening at Delft, by the way. This is Erasmus I'm talking about. Okay. I think Delft has been in a really great spot in its attitude. And from the top, we're seeing administrators leaning in to this situation. I think the best way that we can prepare for the existential risks that we're facing, and they are, I raise my hand at every single one of them, okay, but I'm very optimistic, and that's my most controversial statement for today. I'm very optimistic about what's going on. The administrators are leaning in. The students are not leaning in. Well, some of them are. The students are getting very lazy. And they're not getting lazy in the ways that I would have expected them to get lazy. They're getting lazy in a way where they're avoiding using these tools. Okay, there's a lot of really smart people that are not using these tools because they're afraid. They're afraid of what it means for their own intelligence. They're afraid of what it means for artists, because they know that artists have been had their rights in some ways violated by they didn't agree to this. You know, so there's this cultural a rift that's taking place where very smart people are avoiding using these tools. The laziness also comes in the use of the tools. I'm starting to get assignments returned or graduation students that have 8 bullet points on a slide. Well, if you've got 8 bullet points on a slide, you need to do some cutting. And this is a kind of effort that, you know, people don't like to do. They don't like to cut. They don't like to kill their babies. And these tools are much better at generating than they are at converging. Okay? And that's just a phenomena of where it is today. But students need to learn to cut. They need to learn to not lose the thread. What do you really care about? They need to learn what resonates with them. And we've been so focused as an educational institution on cognitive learning objectives. In fact, the professionalization of education at the TU has entirely focused on cognitive learning objectives. If it's not a cognitive learning objective, it doesn't count. This is a little bit controversial, but it's sort of true. And I want to argue that the preparation that we need to give our students is on the affective side. We need them to know what resonates with them. We need them to know what they care about. Because if they don't know what they care about, if they don't know what they're trying to accomplish with these tools, they're just going to produce walls of text that I'm going to have to grade, and I'm going to get irritated by it. Okay? Now, the point that you brought up about raising the bar, I think, is the most important takeaway for today. Students are capable of doing so much more. Like, we could not expect students to write publishable academic papers. I have a prompt that you can use where you could produce a publishable academic paper, and I'm not saying Nature or anything, but you can produce a publishable academic paper in 15 minutes. I'm just going to keep on these controversial statements. Okay, this means that the challenges that you brought up, Stefan, about the difficulties of writing, this is going to empower so many students. And it also produces a lot of challenges for reviewers, which thankfully, as you pointed out, we're going to have great tools for review as well. We have work to do as a society, we have work to do as professors, but we also have to be careful about the amount of work that we're doing. Our productivity is going to, we have tools that can double, maybe triple our productivity as knowledge workers. Okay? There's a lot of concern about unemployment, but any intern I hire today, they're more than capable of being able to pay for themselves. Okay, this is something that's going to create a huge demand for people that are able to use these tools. I like to think of these tools more as another layer of our cortex that we've managed to grow. Okay, this is something that they don't operate autonomously. They operate with us. And the best way for them to operate with us is for us to lean in and learn how to use them as well as possible. I've got a set of students that are doing incredible things. Being able to type in some words and then be able to 3D print a physical product. You know, we're presenting this to IKEA in a couple of days, and we're a little bit terrified about the flood of consumer products because we're going to be able to use these models to figure out what people really desire and give it to them. There's going to be incredible economic growth, and we're going to be better prepared than ever to manipulate our governmental systems to adapt to things like climate change. We're going to be capable of doing an incredible amount of work, and it is going to stress us out because we are going to be constantly facing our own limitations as human beings where we have these tools. I could be putting out a blog post every day, and I'm not. Okay, and it's sort of depressing, and I kind of feel bad about myself because I could be so much more productive, and I'm not. And I start getting depressed. There will be major mental health issues with these tools where we feel bad about ourselves as human beings, and it's going to get worse. Okay, so I don't know what I can say. We should have fun with these tools. These are tools that we should be encouraging our students to have fun with. We should be enjoying it. We should be seeing what is our human capability. And if I'm going to close on one thing, it's the distinction between intelligence and wisdom. We don't know what either of these things are, by the way. Okay, we've got somewhat better definitions for intelligence, which is largely about how you create a system that's able to optimize its own success. Okay, so it's really about, can you create a system that will be successful? And wisdom, some of the best operational definitions of wisdom are when you're able to balance your own success with the success of those around you and the success of the ecosystems that you're in. And we really want to create AI systems and human systems that are wise enough to promote our own collective well-being. So, yada-da, love ChatGPT. Let's keep using it. Thank you for having this panel today.
Thank you, Derek, very much for that very passionate talk. Also, I'm very curious to your response because I think we've heard some very different viewpoints here, which, that's very good. That's what we're here about. Do you maybe have something to add on or respond to this talk?
Yes, I think so. Of course, I hope that we don't go extinct because of AI, but then the second question is, okay, what then? I think it might be fairly likely that we manage to not go extinct, but still have human-level AI. And I would like to believe what you're saying, that this is like an extra cortex on top of us, but I'm a bit afraid, to be honest, that it's just a replacement of us, that at least people could use it as such. So I'm really wondering, and I would kind of like to have a vision maybe of what a university would look like with unlimited researchers. You can just spin up a team of extra researchers and they churn out papers, which are good. I'm wondering if people have thought about this, and what the university, what kind of a role it sees for itself in such a world?
So there's a notion of computational insatiability, which is that no matter how much work you do, there's always more work to be done, okay? And in knowledge work, it's really clear. The more questions you answer, the more questions you have. And I would guess that no matter how far we go as researchers, we're going to need more and more help to get us to be able to answer the questions that we have. So this, for me, suggests that if we can figure out how to be embedded into these AI systems in the same way that our limbic system is integrated into our cortex, even though arguably our cortex is smarter, there's a way in which we're going to be very well prepared to be aligned with the systems that we're creating.
I have a very interesting question to pose that. We've been seeing behind us the entire time the Ouroboros, or the snake that eats itself. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the myth, but at least what Derek here, from my perspective, proposes is that the more that we use these tools to create more research, the more questions we get. Wouldn't that be more of a runaway effect? And taking it back to Ouroboros myth, if we stop eating the until we start eating the world, it grows out of our control. Is that something we should be worried about, to your opinion, or do you think that runaway effect is a good thing?
I mean, like our role on life is to produce entropy at an ever-increasing rate. Like that's basically what we do as biological systems. And we can say, oh, this is terrible, we should really stop producing entropy, but we're not gonna. And we're part of a natural system. Like this is, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that our particular system continues operating for the next few thousand years. Be a great run, you know? For that to take place, we're going to have to evolve. Like we're going to have to evolve in a major way. But there is incredible opportunity. Like we're still just on our planet, pretty much. We will see in the next couple of years, we'll see sci-fi robots, we'll be seeing exploration of the moon, we'll be seeing how to take advantage of the resources that are available to us. And the biggest risk I think we have is fear, not reasoned fear, because we need to consider the things that we should be afraid of. But if that prevents us from leaning into the opportunities that we have, our human destiny, and if we try to prevent it from happening, that's going to create its own existential risk.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to the floor. I'm sure there's, yes, over there. I'm going to pass this.
Thank you. Hello. You mentioned that students nowadays don't really tend to be lazy and not properly learn how to use ChatGPT or, well, AI tools in general. And my experience as a computer science student has been very hit or miss with these sorts of tools. Sometimes they can do hour-long projects in a few minutes, and sometimes I can smash my head against the AI and it will give me nothing of value. I am curious, do you feel like a component of this might just be that they are not developed enough as tools yet? And also, how would you recommend we go about learning how to use them better?
Do you use 4? Just
no.
Okay, well, that's your first problem, okay? And this is an equity issue. So 3.5 has a context window, a token span of about, 3,500 tokens, something like that. GPT-4 has a token span of 8,000 tokens, which is much closer to like a reasonable size assignment computer program. Claude, which is my preferred tool of choice from Anthropic, which is the former research director of OpenAI, has a 100K token span. Okay, so that's like a whole book. And Meta, who we thought was out of the game, right, Facebook, they just released Megabyte, well, not released, but they announced Megabyte, which has a 1.5 million token span. Okay, we're in the middle of a massive exponential increase. You got to be using the latest tools. And if I can just put in a call for, I recently started quantum computing just because I can. You know what I'm saying? Yes. Okay, like that's the world that we live in, and if we're not taking advantage of those sorts of opportunities, we're not going to be aware of the real risks that we have. So I think that by being as like aggressive as we can about trying to take advantage of them, we're going to realize what the risks are in a much more prepared manner than if we're like, oh, I'm not going to use these tools.
As a follow-up, if I may, you did not really touch on how to learn to use them properly. They are still very new, and
Go to events like this, like hang out, and ChatGPT is about to release a share button, which I don't know why they haven't had it, but we're going to be about to be able to learn how other people use it in a way that we just haven't been able to before. Because like copying and pasting long chats and mailing it to people is an awful system. But we're going to have like a Facebook system. Someone's going to make $1 trillion off of this. But all of our AI systems are going to be sharing with each other. It's about to get a lot easier to learn how to do it well.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to respond? Yes. Oh, next to you. Oh, right next to him. Yeah.
Oh, that could have been easier. Hello. Oh, nice. I want to have a question. Like, I'm really curious about what do you think about the censorship of AI? Like, who will decide which information cannot be generated? And what should we do? Should we just go total open, or?
Well, one of the biggest misconceptions of AI is that we're someday going to create this AI that gets really smart, and it's treated in the singular. Like you've got this singular AI that's super powerful and it like takes over the world and it's like, oh, damn. And even like Max Tegmark, who's a really smart guy, like that's how he sets up his whole concern around AI is like there's an AI. We're going to have an ecosystem. We're going to have so many AI systems. And it's like, if you don't want to use that one, use that one. Like you can download on your computer right now, like you can do whatever you want.
The main question was the censorship means that some knowledge-based censorships, like some very extreme ideas or like development of some maybe weapons, it can be used. And then who would do the censorship on that? Or like maybe we cannot. And then what should we do? Like,
Come on. I mean, this is the same sort of thing. Like if you're in your basement trying to build a weapon, this is not the only tool you have. And you're going to need more resources than it. Like I know MacGyver, you guys don't even know MacGyver probably, but I grew up in the 80s. So if you have like a piece of ham and a wire, you can totally make a thermonuclear bomb, but that's not, I mean, it's not true. You can't do that. You're going to need resources to be able to make weapons of mass destruction. And we've got spy agencies that are going to be super powered by these AI tools that are going to be listening to everything we're doing all the time to be looking out for this. And that way we'll be safe.
Is there anyone who would like to respond to that? I'm sure there is. Yes, over here.
No, here.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go for it.
Hi. I have it's a very interesting discussion. I have my own opinion that we need to make society robust. We need to make education robust to these tools. I think thinking that you can completely control it is impossible. There will be open source models that will be way better within 1 year, 2 years. So that's one fact. But what I'm curious about is that was talked about like what are our own values that we have. And I'm very curious, if we are looking at educators, what are actually the values of our students? So I have a question for the master students in the audience, and recognize some faces, so people have followed my actually machine learning and programming courses here. So, so I know at least for some of you that you know the kind of assignments that I have. Some of them are like programming assignments, right? So I want to give you some hypothetical case, maybe it gives some interesting discussion points as well. Like for the students, if I would not be able to detect if you use ChatGPT, whatever tool, and I give you an assignment, and give you maybe a take-home assignment, and you make it. So you have this, maybe it's a temptation, I don't know, this is maybe the open part. Would you use it, yes or no? Like, you already passed the course, so you can say what you would do. And would you feel bad about it? Would you feel like cheating? Or would you think like, I should be using it? So I'm just curious about your internal what do you say, values about these tools? Do you think there's value in being shielded from it? And do you feel like, would you yourself maybe pass that boundary?
Ayush, yeah, if you want to respond.
Yeah, so particularly there was a course we had, software practicals. The exam of the course referenced the assignments. So, of course, if you have an exam that references the assignments, I'll make it a point to actually know what I'm putting down in the assignment because it comes back to me. And even if it's just for the assignment, I would say there's already a lot of sources online, a lot of forums where people have had similar problems. They post the code and there's a lot of resources, but in the end, even if I use a tool like ChatGPT, it would be to more sort of debug what I'm doing to understand what I could do better. And I would say that, yeah, that if the learning objective is sort of designed with the proper use case, I would not essentially be able to just use it blindly, just put a prompt, copy, paste, and be done with it. So, yeah, I mean, I think it would be constructive for me. That's my opinion.
Yes. Yep. Feel free to respond to that as well.
Yeah, I have a slightly different view on it. I would say that at the end of the day, we can decompose everyone to systems, and that we as students are also just looking to optimize probably the grade or to pass the particular course. So what I would say would be the best way, in which, so if the goal is to optimize and get a higher grade, the goal would be to actually use whatever is available in terms of code, in terms of text, to actually maximize your chances of success.
What is your goal?
Yeah. So my goal would, and what I've seen some other courses have as such, is to actually put the ball in the student's court. So when the question is, for example, we had a couple of courses where the projects were to be defined by the student, whether, for example, it's a design project. So if it's, say, an artificial intelligence-based course, the idea would be come up with your own model such that it has certain things and explain your own innovativeness in a report. Then that would actually force the students, even if they do use such tools, to actually further research and understand what exactly they're implementing, and would be able to still feel good that they have significant contribution because they've still made something by themselves.
You think GPT could not generate a report for you too, and the assignment?
GPT would help, but GPT would not be able to actually ensure that those out-of-the-box ideas which are, student-specific can actually come up. Because a lot of the advice given by ChatGPT is coming from corpus of text which is already existing, and although it can give some amount of creativity, it can't give the students creativity, which has inherent flaws. And I think the flaws are the things which we need to focus on, because flaws are beautiful. It's what students have which AI doesn't. And to have a system where you have students coming up with wild ideas which sometimes may not be as practical, but still has shown that there has been some amount of ingenuity, which AI would probably not, because it already has constraints, it knows what is possible and what is not, would be a great step in getting the ball rolling.
Within interest in time, we've gone over a lot of time we had for this. I don't want to hamper any discussion, so afterwards I highly recommend people to stick around, grab whatever's left of the food and drinks, and keep discussing. But for now, I'd like to give the speakers one last chance to make a closing statement of sorts. And yeah, close off the events that way. Derek, would you like to start maybe?
Yeah, briefly. I think ChatGPT can, and I think going forward into the future, we'll see, but I think it can do 90% of the work. Maybe it'll get to 95%. But that last 5% is always half the work. Like, getting something right still takes a lot of effort, as we know, from trying to produce quality things in our life. And so I think that getting students oriented towards highest levels of quality, it's the same thing that we should have been focused on in education from the beginning. Like, you should try to stretch yourself to produce the highest quality work you can. And if you don't, it's on you. So that's the kind of world that I think we live in, and I think it's a pretty decent approach for students.
Thank you, Derek. Also, how about you?
Yes, one final point that I didn't really get around to during the presentation, but I think it's important also from a technology perspective. Technology is a super trial and error process. I remember that from my time here. Half the time you have no idea what you're doing. You try something, something comes out of it. Same in industry. And this is also true for AI, I think. It's a super trial and error process to develop this technology. And right now we're also implementing it in society as a trial and error process, largely. And to an extent it's unavoidable, I think, and that happens more frequently with technology, that we're just putting it out there and only then you know what the real issues are and only then you can fix it. But we have to think deeply, I think, about which issues are not fixable anymore, and then make sure that we don't implement this in the wrong way.
Thank you. Dimitra, would you like to make a closing statement as well?
Yeah, something we didn't touch upon is if you think a bit historically, because we talk about fears, threats, angst. So if you think about that, which has always been there, every new revolution of industrial revolution or automation had this kind of fear of replacement, if you like, fear of replacement in your job, because you used to be good at it and now someone is better, but also replacement in your own existence. So in the sense of, something is different and better maybe than me, but maybe it's actually a matter of repositioning, because this is what we've proven also in the history. It's a matter of finding again a different role for us, which is maybe indeed using it and do even more and even higher cognitive indeed actions. So in that sense, that's why I finished when saying that it is disruptive and can be also scary, but it can be liberating.
Thank you very much. Stefan, as
yeah, I think to follow up on that, I think the question is exactly what kind of role do we want to give these technologies? So it's great that we're having these conversations. They also show that there is a lot of work to do in terms of both technically steering that the technologies are producing the kind of behavior that we think fits the roles that we want them to fulfill. And institutionally, on the university level, how do we set up regulations for how students are allowed to use ChatGPT and how not? Government-wise, there's a lot of design that's going into this, and that's a question for all of us here. How do we technically, socially design these AI technologies so that they do what we want them to do?
Thank you so much. Can I get a massive round of applause for these amazing speakers, please? Thank you all so much for being here. Again, please stick around if you would like to talk to each other or our panel or get some more drinks. And yes, thank you very much. See you at the next edition, hopefully.